tonight. The fun tonight says that it's one of the few times that one can get a piece of veridical information and say, here, yes, this is in time, space, good evidential data that, well, all this junk you're talking about really does exist. It's very, very difficult to bring that into any type of here-now connotation that you can say that it does exist. And with that in mind, I'll tell you a little story. Only this one is short. A couple years ago, and what's a couple years, don't ask, because it could be 5. Don't think it's longer than that. A man we met who was had been active and was active at that time in a practice called remote viewing came into our acquaintanceship. Do you know what remote viewing is? Just as we don't like the term astral projection when we use out-of-body state, as I perceive it, remote viewing is a deliberately coined scientific term for clairvoyance in the old phrase, so that you can see something or perceive something from a distance. Remote viewing, for those of you who haven't heard of it, is and the term and the practice in the modern scientific sense was developed out of Stanford Research Institute out in California. And SRI, how they got into that, I'm not sure. But they reduced to a science the art of remote viewing. And two physicists were chiefly involved. One was still a Hal Puthoff and a Russ Tard. And they did a long string of experiments regarding this and then published first an article, I believe, in Nature magazine, which is sort of a introductory thing for a new scientific concept. Often appears in the British magazine Nature. This immediately, in spite of their careful preparation, aroused a storm of controversy and questioning their methods and techniques and all of their evaluation and documentation. Shortly after that, shortly, it means a year, they came out with a book, and I believe the book was titled Mind Reach. Was that the one, or was this Mind Reach? And that was met with pretty much the same happily controversy, in the sense that it at least attracted attention to this whole thing of remote viewing. Anyway, we happened to have the luck to have this man come into our area of activity, and we made an arrangement where he came with us on a consulting base while he was still at SRI, and he is still at SRI, and he is still here. And the basic idea was that we would compare the out-of-body state with the remote viewing process and see the efficacy of one as against the other. And so the other thing that we wanted to determine was that how the use of our hemisync process would or would not enhance the whole remote viewing activity. So we had a lot to go through, and happily we were able to get him to be here long enough, and then he got addicted here as well as elsewhere, and so he stayed. And so he now still commutes out to SRI to work in their research pattern, but he's also here. And so we did some work in the lab, and we found, for example, that use of the hemisync process in remote viewing enhanced his capability by at least 60%, using simply albeit a customized hemisync sound pattern for the process and for him. But we found, for example, that in this DC measurement, where he was on his original polarity, saying he was on plus polarity, and he had not gone through this null point. Prior to that time, he was only about 30 to 33% accurate, which is astounding, in his remote viewing. But once he passed that null point and went up into negative polarity and got to about 15 or 18 in that negative polarity, his efficiency went up to about 85%. And it was measurable to that degree. And we have a lot of the material to prove it. And I presume, without much to do, that the process has moved because of that attention, that it has now moved out to SRI and being used out there. I haven't asked because the people out there are friends, and I'm happy that they will use it. But that's the part of this thing that we're into. We find people are using it, and they never bother to tell us. And we don't mind, except that we just like to know. And I'm sure that knowing Hal as well as I do, and he's been here a number of times, if it works, he's going to use it. So I assume it has migrated there. As much as his methods have migrated here, I might add, which is another point. Anyway, what I would like to show you tonight are some visual audio combinations that were used in this whole remote viewing process. Now, mind you, the visual part of it has been set up. We set this up so that we could show you, because initially the remote viewer was in our booth at the lab, and following the tradition of SRI, the address of a given site was put together, and that address took the form of coordinates, and so the remote viewer in the lab or in that given state of readiness was given a set of coordinates and saying, in essence, that's where you should go find out about that particular site and what's there, describe it and so on. That was one method. A second method, which evolved again, and sometimes these coordinates were picked out definitely, as they were in this case, or some were picked out randomly by computer, which even made it more veridical, as it were. The other means would be to put a photograph in a sealed envelope and put it somewhere near the remote viewer, but not actually physically in his hands. And in many cases, the monitor who is conducting the given experiment, the remote viewing experiment, does not know the target itself, does not know what they're trying to identify. May have some cues like do this or do that or suggestion in order to improve getting to the target or observing it. But generally speaking, doesn't know it. So therefore, what I will show you are photographs. The first two are photographs gotten of the site subsequent to the actual experiment. The third is a photograph that was actually used in a sealed envelope during the given experiment that we performed. So if you'd like to show, I'll show you this, but it will show you what you really can do when you begin to play with this kind of energy stuff. All right?